Welcome to At the Table with Tony. My name is Anthony Scillia, better known as Tony Mangia. Tonight, I have the extreme honor and privilege of welcoming Father Frank Donio. He is a Palatine father, and he is the director of the Catholic Apostolate Center in Washington, D.C., and he's a Jersey boy. So we're going to have a good time today. We're going to talk about Jersey, being Italian-American. We're going to learn about who Vincent Pallotti is and who the Palatines are and were and the history of them. So I am, and what the Catholic Apostolate Center is and what they do. So I'm really looking forward to spending some time with Father Frank. So Father, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tony. Great being with you.
This is great. I know we've been friends on Facebook for quite a while, and now I mean I live in Jersey. You're down in DC, right?
Yes, I'm down just outside of Washington, D.C. The center's offices are in D.C., and then we also have a retreat center that's also a residence for the Palatines locally, and that's about a mile from the Washington, D.C. line. And so it's a very pleasant area to live. Of course, I'm spending a lot of time in it at the moment, as all of us are. But it's been good in some ways to be present with my community and so forth here, and so it's great to be with you tonight.
But it's great because again, like I said, we've known each other for a while, I guess through Facebook, but to actually be able to talk face to face, computer to computer, this is pretty wild. And I guess it takes a pandemic to set these things up.
It does, and I really enjoy I enjoy following a lot of your different content that whether it's the things about food, but also then just these the different Italian American celebrations, the churches that I didn't know even existed. And I know you were not too long ago at the church where my provincial is at Our Lady of Grace, or its real name is Madonna della Grazie, in Fairview, New Jersey, and you did a beautiful job, some really beautiful pictures from there, and it was nice to see one of our places profiled the way you do in such a beautiful way.
And you know what? I mean, all these years I've lived in Jersey, that was the first time I've lived in the Archdiocese of Newark for my whole life. And that was the first time I was ever in that church. And I was blown away by the beauty of it. Simple beauty, nothing, nothing extravagant, but a real simple, beautiful church.
Yes. And it was, when it was built back in the 20s, it was just done in a style that was actually a somewhat popular style in Italy at the time, because the confreres, my Palatine confreres who were there, of course, were from Italy. We were part of the Italian province at that time. And so the front of it, even when you step back and you go out on the street and you look at the whole front of it, the design is very much something you would find in Italy from that time period.
Now, this is a great segue into my first question for you, because I know I've heard of Vincent Pallotti, of course. I heard of the Palatines. I know that they're also up at Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church in East Harlem.
Yes.
That's more of a recent addition, right?
No, Our Lady of Mount Carmel. No, that's our mother church in the United States.
Oh, is it really?
We built that. We built that in 1884. The first Palatine, who interestingly enough was a German, Father Emilian Kerner. But he had joined our community and was in England, which is one of our first foundations outside of Rome. And we were there for Italian immigrants in the 1840s, and then built one of the first churches in London after Catholic churches were being permitted again to be built. And Saint Vincent Pallotti himself raised the money. And that's St. Peter's Church in London, near Westminster, and that still has Palatines there as well. And then we came here in 1884. The first Palatine came, and we've been here ever since. And we initially came to serve the needs of Italian immigrants in the New York, particularly in the New York, New Jersey, and into Maryland as well. So we've been in Maryland and Baltimore, and Baltimore's Little Italy, for example, since 1909. We were in Brooklyn from the 1880s. Newark, there was a St. Philip's in Newark itself.
Yes,
and that we were there back again in the late 19th century. My hometown in Hammonton, New Jersey, in South Jersey, we were there in 1901. It's really an untold history. In fact, one of our Palatine students, Dr. Sean Phillips, who's is Italian American as well, but part of his family. he's done a lot of studies in this. He's a historian. And he said it's really one of the untold stories about Italian immigration, the amount that the Palatines did for Italian immigrants and continue to do. We
Yes,
still
yes.
have communities where we're serving Italian immigrants, including Baltimore, Fairview.
Because I know that, like for example, I know one of the communities that were big with the Italians were the Capuchins,
Yes.
also the Scalabrini fathers.
Scalabrinians, yes.
But when you hear that, I never, like I said, I don't know that much about. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm remiss in saying that I don't know much about Saint Vincent Pallotti. So if we
Yeah,
can just dive a little bit into his history, who he
sure.
was, where he was from in Italy, I think so. Take it away, Father.
Let's go back. So we have to go back to 1795, and he was born in Rome itself.
Hmm.
And this is a unique thing because he was born in Rome. His whole life was in Rome, studied in Rome, was ordained for the Diocese of Rome in 1818, and his entire priesthood until his death in 1850. So he died at just shy of, in fact, his birthday is coming up. April 21st would be the anniversary his birthday. But he was 54 years old when he died on January 22nd, 1850, which is his January 22nd is his feast day. And he believed that everybody was called to be an apostle. And the first 20 years of his life, it was rough in Rome because in 1798, there was a revolution. The Pope Pius VI was run out of the city. Now, Pallotti was a small child at that point. He didn't remember that. But of course, then you have the Napoleonic Wars, and Pope Pius VII is taken by Napoleon from the city in 1809. 1815, he comes back. Now, at this point, Pallotti's 20 years old, 3 years shy of ordination. So he really was affected by this. He saw baptized people just kind of throwing off their faith, becoming revolutionaries, taking on these different ways. And he just decided, no, we have to help revive faith, rekindle charity, and help everybody become an apostle.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he dedicated his life to. So he worked in seminaries. He worked with priests because sometimes the priests were not as, and seminarians were not what they could have been. He worked in a lot of those international colleges that were there, with the English, the Scots, the Irish, and what was called the Pontifical Urban College or the Propaganda Fide. So he met seminarians from around the world and helped them with their studies. He was a professor. He assisted them. He was a spiritual director. He also then, and you probably would find this interesting, because you're involved with the Constantinian order.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Church of the Neapolitans in Rome is Santo Spirito dei Napolitani in Via Giulia. He was named rector of that church in 1834. In 1835, he created a group of lay people, religious, and clergy that has come to be called the Union of Catholic Apostolate. And it was at that point that there were also these seminarians and priests who started to work together with him. And then he started to live in community. And then eventually a community came out of that, which he was not necessarily interested in founding a community. He was founding this group to do three things: help the churches work with the missions, revive the faith of Catholics, he called that a hidden apostolate, and to do works of universal charity, because he was in the streets. He worked with we're in a pandemic right now. He was out there working with cholera. There was a big cholera epidemic in 1837. He was out there, the community was out there, the lay people, it was, of course, a different way of looking at these things than now. But the reality was he ministered in whatever way he could. And so in the late 1840s, he was confessor to two popes. He was confessor to Pope Gregory XVI. He knew Pius IX as a layperson before he was even pope, long before he was even a seminarian, and predicted he would be pope someday.
Really?
When Pius IX was beatified, in L'Osservatore Romano, in the article about him, the first paragraph said, St. Vincent Pallotti predicted he would be pope. So there you are. But in 1848, Pius IX is run out by revolutionaries. And Pallotti is hiding in the Irish College, the Pontifical Irish College. They went door to door because they wanted to kill him because he was seen as too aligned with the papacy. He was always a loyal son of the church, but he was actually in contemporary terms, very progressive. Lay people, religious clergy working together, doing this work together. That sounds like Vatican II. Well, it's not surprising that he was canonized after the first session of the Second Vatican Council closed in 1962, in December 8th, 1962, January 20th, 1963, the last canonization of St. John the 23rd was Saint Vincent Pallotti. And a lot of that decree on the apostolic laity and so forth, that was written together with St. John Paul II and our general. And a lot of Pallotti's ideas were put into that decree. Things that we talk about today, especially lay people being apostles or missionary disciples. So we became an international missionary community. And we're now 24, the priests and brothers are now 2,400 in 56 countries. Some of our first missions were initially to Italian immigrants in London while Pallotti was still alive, here in the United States, and then down in South America as well, in Uruguay, Brazil, where Italians started to immigrate as well, down to, in fact, Garibaldi went down and got involved with the revolutions there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
So they went down in the late 1800s to go and care for these Italian immigrants who are in these new countries. And then we eventually went to Africa and around the world. But we also have sisters as well as then lay people.
So what was the name of the society or the community that he founded?
It was called Society of the Catholic Apostolate, but there was a controversy over that because the Catholic Apostolate at the time was seen as that which was of the Pope and the hierarchy. And so after he died, our name was taken away in 1854 after our Cardinal Protector, Cardinal Lamborghini, who was the other candidate with Pius IX, little bit of Catholic trivia there in the conclave of 1846. He dies in 1854. Pallotti, of course, is already dead. And our name's taken away. And we're told, you're Pius Society of the Missions. That's who you are. And you will be international missionaries. And so that lay component, that other piece, the other pieces started to fade away. And we became international missionaries and very effective at it to this day, going to areas where people just would not go. I mean, Pallotti was a very humble man. He didn't put his name on things. He didn't make a show, but he believed that you have to use all means in order to preach the gospel of Christ, whatever those means are, media, going out in the streets, the sacraments, the liturgical life of the church, whatever those mean, teaching, whatever those means are, retreat work, all of those things Pallotti did. Prisons, he worked with people on death row, he worked in hospitals, all these types of things he did around the city of Rome.
That's unbelievable. It really is. And again, I mean, I wish I knew more about him. So this for me is I'm getting a little bit of getting schooled right now, which is great. But so then let's talk a little bit more about what you do because you are the director of the Catholic
Apostolate Center
here in America. So do they have different centers throughout the world, or
No, this is a unique creation of my province of the Palatines, we're the Immaculate Conception province, and we're here on the East Coast. And so around 2009, 2010, we were talking about, along with other lay collaborators, we wanted to do something, some new things as a province. And so in 2011, we began this work. We also then in 2014 began a mission in the Andes in Peru. And so we thought we wanted to do something that would contribute even further to the life of the church. So initially this was a very digital online ministry. It has since grown quite significantly. We do a lot of work with the U.S. Bishops' Conference, various dioceses, various national Catholic organizations we collaborate with. And the center is really taking the charism of St. Vincent Pallotti and applying it in the 21st century. So what that means is, how are we reviving faith, rekindling charity, and forming apostles now? So how can we help active Catholics live as apostles? And so we do that through evangelization, but it's not necessarily initial evangelization. It's helping people who are already evangelized. Here's how you can go forth. Here's how you are sent out into the world. The other is through greater collaboration and co-responsibility, growing that among Catholic leaders. We're not in different camps here. We need to work together for the mission of Christ and his church. And then the other part of that is also that association that I mentioned, this Union of Catholic Apostolate, that now exists again and is growing and flourishing around the world. We try to provide in English and also some things in Spanish. We have a separate website in Spanish, but we have a web. So how do we do that? We do that with webinars, podcasts, blog posts, all sorts of resource pages and materials, things that we have in both English, and then we also have a full website in Spanish, and then a lot of social media. Our social media is really large. Facebook is 223,000 around the world. And Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all the different means that that are really common now. But
Yes.
Back in 2011, we're just not really being done in the same way.
Now,
And we're still trying to be on the edge of that.
Now let me ask you a question. How can we be better apostles? How can we be better followers of Christ?
Well, the first and foremost thing is that we need to witness him in what we say and and especially in what we do. Catholics are very good at the what we do often. And that is how we witness, because sometimes when we say witness, I'm not comfortable with that. What do I say? What do I do? That kind of stuff. That's for the evangelicals. I do my stuff. But it's in the doing. People will often ask, why are you doing that? And how many times do Catholics say, my faith? And then that opens a conversation. And we can't be afraid of that. It's interesting that in the midst of a pandemic, more people are willing to talk about faith. More people are willing to post things about faith that they weren't posting before. All of a sudden, I'm seeing, and it's not a critique. It's a wonderful thing. We have to then help them to do that outside of a pandemic.
Because I was going to ask you, how can we be, because we have to, we're in the middle of this pandemic and we have to practice social distancing. So we can't, we can't attend church the traditional way of actually going to the church. So we have to attend it through mass online or through the TV. So how can we bring the faith, and how can we be apostles during this pandemic? How can we, I guess like what you're saying, part of it is, through posting on social media or whatever, but really how can we dive into that?
Italians have always known how to do this because we do it through family. And now, we can't get around the table in the same way, but we can gather. We can find other ways of gathering. We can find other ways of keeping connected with one another. And then in our own household, we can do things that are really, the church talks about the domestic church. Well, really, what is faith lived at home? How do we live? How do we take responsibility? How does a baptized person take responsibility for their faith? Going to church is not a consumer activity. I go in, I get my sacrament, I go, and it's like going to, I'm not going to belittle. What I'm saying is that it has to be throughout our day. In fact, the studies will show, sociological studies and so forth, when it comes to young people, is that if you just reserve that to Sunday, it's not going to permeate. When you're living faith every day, I wonder how many children are going to have even much deeper faith because their parents at the moment are being even more intentional. It's not just, let's get in the car, let's get over to mass, blah, 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 blah. I've seen it now, I've lived that, I've seen it with family members and friends, but now we have to be even more intentional.
Yeah.
People are making home altars, something that they probably wouldn't even thought about in the past. Again, in the Italian household, that's just there.
Yes.
But in terms of a number of things that I see different people, and these are not necessarily very traditionalist Catholics. I'm talking about people who are the everyday Catholic who happen to be going now, or the desire now. Now I can't go. So really we have to look at that we're in communion with the Trinity, and we're in communion as the body of Christ. whether we're in the church or we're not. The church has always had, again, we're missionaries. Many of those mission stations often didn't see a priest for years or months. So spiritual communion that we're now kind of returning to, which is an ancient tradition in the church, spiritual communion is now, what about the people in the military who are on deployments and how few chaplains there are?
That's true.
One of the crying needs in the church today are military chaplains. We do work with various things over the years with, the Archdiocese for Military Services, and they do tremendous work. But these chaplains are so few and far between. So these things, the act of perfect contrition, these are things that are part of the church's treasury that are coming to the fore again.
Yes.
In this difficult time. But I think we need to recognize that larger context that we're in.
The other day I interviewed Bishop Frank Donio of the
He's
diocese.
one of my favorites.
He was great, and he mentioned one thing that it struck me. He says that absence makes the heart grow fonder. So to know that we're Christ is always with us, God is always with us, yes, but to be absent from the sacrament of communion, really, it makes you yearn for it that much more. It makes you want to go back to confession, want to take an active role in the life of the church. So I mean, you're right. There is this. What did Saint Augustine say? My heart is restless, Lord, until it rests in
you. Until it
Right?
rests in me. Yeah. And I know I am following you, Tony, over time. You've had your own faith journey.
Oh.
And so that I think each of us, wherever that comes in, we can build up each other in this time. I watched that interview that you did with Bishop Cajano. I know Bishop Cajano fairly well from work with the Committee on Evangelization and Catechesis at the Bishops' Conference. And I loved his line about going to church. It's the antipasto of heaven. It's like I think that's the most fantastic line I think I've ever heard. And it's true, because that's really, it's a foretaste. We talk about a foretaste. I mean, really, that's what an antipasto is. It's a foretaste before we get to the pasta, before we get to the before we get to the second. We get to these, and the reality is that there is this longing, and I'm seeing that, I'm witnessing. There's also a longing on the part of priests.
Yes.
Diocesan priests. I live in community, and I have a variety of ministries I'm engaged in, including teaching. And there is a difference in that, and some of that I can do a lot of it I can do online. Whereas my brother priests who are diocesan priests and in parishes, this is a very painful situation for them. They understand why. They have the, they're certainly, that's why, we're Catholics, faith and reason. We're not against science. We recognize that we need that together with our faith, that those things go together. But the reality is that there's a longing on their part too, to serve God's people. Some have come up with very creative ways where they're able to do that.
Yes.
Others it's just as simple as, hey, I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to call you and see how you are. Yep. And that's blown away a number of people in parish. It's like, gosh, Father called me, or somebody from the parish called me to check in on me.
I think that's also, I mean, again, social media, it's great, it's bad, but I think that in times like this, we can really use it for the pros, to be able to reach people that maybe otherwise we wouldn't be able to reach, and to be able to bring, Christ to the people through this is a new evangelization.
Yes, and that's why we utilize that. We have a fantastic team I work with, and if you go to our Facebook or our Instagram or our Twitter or our YouTube channel, we have a lot of creative things that are there on social media, and they're done purposely so that people can share them. To make it easy.
What is the website? What is the website? The
website is CatholicApostolatecenter.org, and we have a whole set of resources just on this situation. So if you go to CatholicApostolatecenter.org, the whole name, /COVID-19, there are, every day we're adding new resources.
Oh,
webinars,
wow.
podcasts, articles. It's a fantastic resource. And, you know, these are mostly younger Catholics who I work with, who are just have tremendous, and they work in a variety of fields. Some of them some people work with us full time, but we have a number of people who work with us part time, and they're in a variety of fields, but they're active Catholics who want to be able to share faith, to help their brothers and sisters to know that they're sent too. And at the moment, it's one of the ways that we can be sent. We can't go out. So that's one way. Social media is one way. Picking up the phone and calling somebody is one way for us to be sent out to others who need us.
And to be present to them. I mean, I think that's important too. I know by some of us are, you know, if we're not lucky enough to have a wife, a family, if we're alone, it's, you know, it could kind of wear on your mind, it could wear on your heart, it could wear on your spirit. So to be able to
Yes.
make that even if we can't make a personal physical connection, we can still make that, you know, like you said, pick up the phone, send an email, you know, Zoom is amazing. This I
It
never knew what
is.
Zoom was until this COVID hit. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I mean, to be honest with you, I wouldn't be doing these interviews if it wasn't. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy, but if it wasn't for this pandemic, I started a podcast but my whole idea of the podcast is to actually go out on the road, go on
Yes.
location, and to not be able to do that. I said, man, I gotta do something. I can't just sit home all night watch the news because then I'm gonna go crazy. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why I decided to do these podcasts. And I tell you, this is great because I'm able to connect, meet people I never met before, make connections, make new friends.
Yes.
So this is a beautiful thing. And you mentioned us and Bishop Gentleman, so we have to talk a little bit about your growing up as an
Sure.
Italian American in Hammonton, New Jersey. So Hammonton, New Jersey. Let's kind of give if you look at New Jersey,
Yeah.
it's on the East Coast. So where exactly is Hammonton?
So you have to look at it. So it's directly between uh, Philadelphia and Atlantic City. So about halfway.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's considered South Jersey.
It's considered South Jersey. It's considered
So you
really
say
the
pork roll.
geographic center of South Jersey. There are those who claim this Central Jersey thing. I know, but you know, but if you the reality of Hammonton is that it's, you know, it's in the Pines. It's at the end of you know, the Route 206 that comes down and go. It's a farming community primarily.
Excuse,
Although
I
it's
don't want to
changed.
cut you off, Father. You call it Taylor ham or pork roll?
Oh no, in South Jersey you call it pork roll. There's no question about that. In fact, that's what's written on the package there. But we won't go there. Uh, I saw this meme where it had these two, you know, like monsters rising from the sea. Taylor ham, Taylor pork roll going at it, and then kind of the rest of the country looking like, you know, bemused. I don't know.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
it's
Father,
a
cut you off. I had to ask you though. I knew your answer was going to be, but I had to ask.
oh good, you know.
So Hammonton.
So Hammonton is really a place where it's a fascinating place in many ways because you wouldn't expect the Italian Americans to be there. It's very different from the reality of the cities where most of the Italian Americans settled, and or in areas where there was industry or coal mining or things along those lines. This is a farming community. Now these farming communities are dotted throughout the country, you know, Italian American farming communities. The interesting thing about this one is that initially it was settled by New Englanders who came down to farm. And then there was a man by the name of Landis who actually founded Vineland, New Jersey, which is another big Italian community. He worked with people in Italy to get immigrants to come over to help with the farms, and some of them eventually also got land and started to grow things. There was a whole community in Sicily called Gesso, which is outside of Palermo, and many people from that community were the initial Italians who came. But then many from throughout southern Italy, including my own family members, came to the area. Mine came to the area in the 1890s up through the 19 teens, all sides of my family. So all sides of my family are from. And then the Pallottines, we arrived there in 1901 to serve the needs of the immigrants. That was the Diocese of Trenton at that point. So That's but Hammonton, has it was a unique Italian American enclave. There initially a Puerto Rican community, and then a further Hispanic migration of Mexicans and people from Central America. Again, mostly for the farming that would go on there, and still goes on there. It's now what's called the blueberry capital of the world. Part of my family was on my father's side was in the produce industry. On my mother's side, they were butchers and then small markets. And then my grandparents, on my mother's side, my mother's parents owned an Italian restaurant as well. So food was very much a part of my own life. And then the signature thing there, which you've mentioned in the past, is the long-standing feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which this year will be, God willing, in July will be 145 years. Yeah,
I think
1875.
that's the longest. I believe it's the longest standing Italian festival in the country.
Yes, it is. It's the longest running, continuously running Italian festival in the country. And for a while, Hammonton had the most Italians per capita in the country. I don't know if that's the case now, but in the last census, that was the case.
I've read that too. Now, where is your family from in Italy?
My father's family is from Molise, a little an area on the side of the Apennines that is more toward the Mediterranean, and a little town called Lungano near the city of Isernia. And then my mother's family, because I believe you have family in Campania. I think I heard, yeah. And so my mother's family is from Campania. They're from Sarno, which
that's
is
where the tomatoes are, right?
Yeah, Sarno. And so her grandfather was a stonemason. My great grandfather on that side, my other great grandfather, Donio great grandfather, he was. Then there were others from Avellino. There were others from different areas of primarily southern Italy. But my other grandfather, he came in 1891. He was 20 years old. My grandfather Donio. He had one bag. He got on the boat in Naples. He was a goat herder, and he came across, but came down to Philadelphia. It was before Ellis Island, so he came down to Philadelphia. And by 1897, was married in the parish church where I was, which that's the same parish where I was ordained. It was a new church building, but it was the same parish I was ordained.
What is the name? What is the name of the church there?
The church was, and the church building is still called St. Joseph's, but they consolidated a lot of churches down there in the Camden Diocese, and so it's now St. Mary of Mount Carmel, and it's composed of two different church buildings: St. Anthony of Padua and St. Joseph. Now, the St. Joseph name came from the name of the parish church in Gesso, which was San Giuseppe.
Oh, okay. Because now you said it's obviously the feast is Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So yes. How did that come to be? How did they choose Mount Carmel as the feast?
That was the Madonna that they had devotion to in Gesso. So this was again brought from Gesso, and this procession. They started a procession in the fields with a picture of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and it was a society that eventually developed out of that. In fact, my great grandfather was part of that society. Great grandfather Donio and some of my Donio relatives. Back in the late 1890s, early 20th century, but that society still exists, and they still are the ones who they have a carnival, they have stands, but then the church also is very much involved with that as well. It's really both of them together that are doing the variety of things. And there's a procession. There's a famous procession, not just of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. It's of all the statues in the church. It's a procession of saints with the bands, the more traditional Italian bands. In fact, Mount Carmel Society made its own band as well, but the different Italian bands, and they'll process through the streets. It takes about, when I was growing up, it took about 5 hours. When in recent years, it's been more about because of the crowds, but in recent years, and they've always maintained it on the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel itself to this day, July 16th. We would talk about the 16th, like people would talk about July 4th. July 4th wasn't a big deal in my hometown. You would talk about, people would say, oh, the 4th, what are you doing on the 4th? No, in my hometown, you talked about the 16th, and everybody knew what you were talking about. And so from a young age, I walked in that procession, and my mother, in fact, my mother has for years has done a float of the Most Holy Rosary with the Immaculate Conception on it. And so that's something that's very special. She was, in fact, she was walking behind, she and my father couldn't have children. And so for the first, the year before I was born, she walked behind the statue of St. Jude and prayed. And then a year later, I was born.
Oh, wow.
And a year later, I was pushed in a carriage, baby carriage, in the procession in Thanksgiving. So and then later I became director of St. Jude Shrine in Baltimore, which is one of our Palatine works. So it was a great privilege, to be able to be there with the people there and the devotion that was there. Because that church also in Baltimore was for Sicilian immigrants called St. John the Baptist. That's how, and we got there in 1917. And in 1909, where there were Abruzzes, in Little Italy in Baltimore, we were there from 1909.
And that's
So
that's St. Leo's
St.
Church?
Leo's, yeah, St. Leo's, we've been there since 1909. Church was built in 1881 for Italians, but in 1909, we've been there continuously. We are still there, and we've had a long-standing presence there.
So the feast is put on, or was founded by like a mutual aid society.
Yeah, and they still are a mutual aid society, similar to a lot of the societies that were founded at that time. Except this one's quite old, and I'm not sure exactly when that developed into one of these societies. It was initially a group of people in Thanksgiving, and then these things kind of grow. The parish itself really didn't start until 1886. So it was kind of interesting how and it was kind of opening and closing. It was a mission church, it was parish, it was a mission church until we came in 1901. And then we brought stability. When we brought stability to it being a parish always then from then on.
So obviously that is how your initial connection with the Palatines
Yes.
was in your childhood parish.
Yes. Yeah. There were always at least 4 Palatines in the parish at any given time. We would have either 3 priests and a brother or 4 priests. And we also took care of all the Spanish language, caring for the Spanish-speaking community in that whole area, general area. And because we had men who could speak Spanish. And so it was a tremendous ministry, not only among the Italian Americans or any of the Catholics who were there, but we started a school. We had our minor seminary there for a time. Eventually, out of there, we founded a school that still exists that we own called Bishop Eustace Preparatory School down in South Jersey. And initially, many of the students from there were Italian Americans out of Camden, New Jersey, and the environs there. So we've always had this piece to us. In terms of the care. Now we care for a variety of people of different cultures and walks of life, and it's really quite a beautiful ministry that we carry on in our province today.
When did you know that you were going to be a priest? Was it a moment in your life?
Yeah.
Or
I was, it's funny, not just a priest, a Palatine. So my confirmation name is Vincent, for Vincent Pallotti, and I was 12. I really had a clear sense then. I don't know why. That sounds maybe a bit strange, but and I went through public school. My parents went through Catholic high school, but I went through public school, and it was funny. My nickname, even in the public school, was Father Frank, which is what I go by now. And it was really And I wasn't like an overly pious kid. There was something about the Pallottines and the way in which they were just in there with people, the way they cared for people, and cared for me, that touched my life. And then as I got to know Saint Vincent Pallotti and what he taught, and his spirituality, he's really, to this day, he's my hero. He's the person who gives me inspiration in terms of how to follow Christ, in a just a tremendously authentic way, that will hopefully lead to greater sanctity.
Now, growing up Italian American, do you have any good stories, any good memories of growing up Italian in Hammonton?
Well, I think especially a lot of them around the feast, because of course you have sausage and a lot of it's around food. I was running around my grandparents' restaurant, on my mom's side. It was called Chateau Belaz, and it was a restaurant that really had become fairly successful over time, and even to this day, old timers in Hammonton and the environs remember this place. And it was I remember as a little kid running around in the restaurant. And I grew up in the helping out of my family's produce brokerage, as well as helping out at the church. And so, I met all kinds of people as a result of that. Not just Italian Americans, but a variety of people. And one of the things that I just found is that among the Italian Americans, there was just this ability to just simply often call it as it is. Here it is, and this is. Now some people would take offense at that, and I grant that. But it was also the one thing that I really loved about my hometown was people were not very ostentatious. Like, they didn't show up. A lot of them were own land and this and that. They put a lot of effort in what they were doing and the kind of work that they were engaged in, and they tried to give the best face that they could to the Italian community, for the Italian community, to other people, and they were very proud, and going through the streets. People talk about street evangelization. Going through the streets 3 times in the summer with 3 different feast days, they were all off of devotions that Italians had brought over: John the Baptist, and then Assumption. And each of them had societies that went along with them. And they would, again, all the saints would come out. The Verdi band of Norristown would come.
Oh, they're great.
They would play. Oh yeah, they're terrific. And they would play and walk in the procession and all this kind. So this was really, I didn't realize that things were different until I left. You grow up in a certain way, with a certain way of cooking, a certain way of going about. Now, interestingly enough, there was a second wave of immigration that went on in Hammonton, and we would call them the Italians, because we were there for, the families intermarried. So I was interrelated to a lot of the people. When you're in a place for decades and you don't leave that place, even people who went to college will come back. And so they also had a big garment industry there. And so there was an immigration in the 50s and 60s of all these garment workers who came there and were working with, companies that were selling suits in New York City and all around the country in the finest, shops and whatever. So you had this whole other enclave of Italians who came, and it was just fascinating to see how that developed.
Yeah, that's 50s, 60s, 70s. I always call it was a second wave of immigration, because my wife's family, they came over in 69. Her mother came in 69. So that was that second wave. Where do you know where the second wave was from?
No, some of them were from some of the places where, like, for example, there were relatives of mine from Salerno who came, and they, again, were working in the garment industry and so forth. Or were, who was a house painter, who was a stonemason, because you also had people who were brought over, like that people who, like my great grandfather on my mom's side, of my great grandfather Falciani, he would go back regularly, and in fact, he came back one year with a bride because his wife had died sadly of cancer fairly young,
Oh,
and then he went back. And what was interesting about that is that none of the other relatives went back. There was just it was a different kind of in fact, my great grandfather on my father's side, great grandfather Donio, he really didn't talk about it. He said certain things, and when my father and I went back to the town, the things that my father was told by his grandfather, he said this is exactly what he described. You know, so my father took a great interest and then, you know, my great grandfather Donio, he had 14 children who lived to adulthood. Other family members were 10, 11, and then the smallest one were the Falcianis. They were 4. So that was a small family. Because that was the other thing. You had all these people, you know, these families were big. They were Italian and they were Catholic. And so, you know, big family.
absolutely. So obviously, big family. You gotta feed a big family. So what are some of the things that you love to eat? And then we'll get into what, because I know we took a little bit of we're messaging about quarantine cooking, but we'll get into that in a second.
Yeah,
But
sure.
what are some of your favorite things that you growing up or even now that you know what's like Sunday sauce? Like what is your thing?
No, you know, yeah, that was certainly true in my parents' era. We were more of a pizza family on Sundays, you know, and there were a number of really fantastic pizzerias and still are in Hammonton. And so, you know, they were just their mom and pop shops, and that's the only location they have, and that kind of thing. So, you know, that was but you know, you did a segment and you really threw me back. I can't remember. It wasn't your podcast. It was, I don't know if you took some pictures or whatever, and you were talking to somebody from the Sarno area, and it was pastita, what we call pastita, which is the multiple pastas at Easter time. My mother would always make, and this year unfortunately couldn't get all the ingredients together, but you know, it was like 3 different types of pasta, 3 different types of cheese, all kind of, and then baked.
Yes.
And we called it pastita, but it was you were up in, I think, Bronx or something, and it just threw me back because I had never seen it anywhere else. And I was like, oh my gosh, I even sent the pictures to family members. Look at this, you know, this is amazing. Things like, of course, you know, you're in a farming area, so tomato salads were huge, you know, with garlic and oil and fresh onion, you know, fresh tomatoes. Another thing, my grandmother, I was talking about this tonight to my confrere here, one of my confreres here in community, and it was Savoy cabbage with Italian bread and garlic and oil all mixed together. My grandmother did that. She, of course, had a beans and greens. She, you know, with the escarole and the beans. You know, my grandmother would come over after they sold their restaurant. She would come over every night and cook.
Oh,
So it was just you know, it was simple stuff, but you know, pasta aglioia, you know, the different, I mean, all again, very simple things, but made with love. You know, I didn't know of a vegetable not sautéed with garlic and oil. It's just like, it was beyond me when I went, you know, I went to college, entered the community and went to college, and we had, you know, people who were cooking and they were not Italian American, and it was like, oh, okay, this is why people don't like broccoli. You know, I get it now. Or asparagus, you know, fresh asparagus, or you know, artichokes, you know, the stuffed artichokes and things like that. Things that I would take for granted. You know, didn't everybody have raviolis and villa milanese for, you know, Christmas? I don't know. You know, so that kind of thing. Those are the
but
kinds of memories I have.
but that is interesting because you know now, especially being in this pandemic period, and that it's hard to go shopping on a regular basis, so you have to kind of
Mhm.
use what you have in the pantry. So I call it either pantry cooking, or I call it cucina. This is kind of like a throwback to cucina povera, which a lot of the
See,
recipes that you say are these
better.
things that I grew up eating, just like like I said, escarole and beans, just simple foods. But yet now you go to a restaurant, they're charging you $50 for a bowl of it.
My
It's
my father would always joke about polenta. You know, he said, He said, you go to the restaurant now. There's all this gourmet thing. He said, the first snow, we would make the polenta, and it was for the poor people. That wasn't, and that was always the thing that just blew his mind when it came to, fine dining as time went on. And so, yeah, it is. In fact, one of our team members at Catholic Apostolate Center, he put together. He was trained in culinary school, and now he's getting a degree in theology. So because Christ came into his life in a big way. But he wrote a post about that type of thing. Like, how do you take these different things and what do you want to, and, one of the points is about comfort, for Italian Americans. When you did your interview with Lydia, for example, Bastianich, and one of the things was, it's simple ingredients that you can do something with. So for example, I had some stale bread, Italian bread, and garlic and oil, and it had cannellini beans for some reason that had been sitting in the pantry for who knows how long. And so I emptied that out, and I took garlic, oil, the cannellini beans, did some pasta up, mixed those together. Of course, some crushed red pepper, because in Molise, we used a fair amount, and then put in the breadcrumbs, crushed over it, and mixed that all together. And it was, a very simple meal, but really very hearty, and also really good.
Yeah.
I do say so. And it's not something I made before. I just thought, okay, these things these things work.
Mm-hmm.
Let's try that, and it's that's one of the things, I find with many times with Italian cooking, people are asking me for recipes and things, and it's like, hey, experiment.
Yeah.
It's
Now,
not that hard,
The side of your family that made the polenta, they were from Molise?
Yeah, yes, they were
Okay.
from Molise, and
Because
of course they were shepherds and goat herders, and so and up in the mountains, so it was gold.
Yeah. So what else have you been cooking while in quarantine?
Well, the other day what I did was, one of my confreres, he made stuffed pork chops, but unfortunately we had this big thing, and so he had like 8 pork chops, and he made like 4. And he said, "Oh, I've got these pork chops left." And I thought, okay, let me see what I can do with these. So what I did was I sauteed them in garlic and oil, bones and all, and then put in my cans of diced tomatoes and seasonings and so forth, and brought that all together and just let it simmer and simmer and simmer, and had this wonderful wonderful pork gravy, as we call it in my area. It was one person who corrected me and said it was sauce, but in my area, anything with meat in Hammonton was gravy, and anything that didn't have meat was sauce, like a marinara sauce.
I mean,
as I would say, marinara. So you had a lot of the dialect kinds of things that went on in Hammonton.
Were they like, we say, mozzarella and galamà,
Mozzarella and all those things were pretty. Yeah, all those things were. It was because a lot of us, of course, people didn't standard Italian came with the Mussolini, really.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the immigrants, I mean, of course, they had dialect, and in their dialect, that's actually some of the words were that, in the Sicilian dialect or the dialect of some of the southern Italian villages. But so standard Italian was not, I certainly didn't learn standard Italian. It was really on that one side that went back and forth that they had more standard Italian. In fact, my grandmother on that side, she spoke only Italian in the house until she went to school. So, and she retained that. She was able to retain rather good Italian.
Now, were there so you mentioned that there were a couple of other feasts in Hammonton. So you had, obviously the big one was always Mount Carmel.
Mount Carmel was always biggest. And in fact, thousands and thousands of people, we're talking mid 20th century, for example, you'd have 50,000 people or more who would show up in Hammonton. Now over the course of a week, you'll have several thousand people. Of course, there's a carnival there. There's all these other things. They're there. There's all the food stands. Of course, the big sandwiches, sausage and peppers, and those are all fresh peppers from that area, cut and everything else. And sausage that's made by local markets. So there's two local markets in particular, Bagliani's and Inferreras, that they have fantastic sausage, and so it's all very local, all very fresh, and that's really one of the things, because you also had families that would come back together. People who would come. There was really a reunion time in a lot of ways, and still is in Hammonton, among the Italian families, for people to come back into town or friends to see one another who haven't seen one another in a long time. And of course, there's the whole faith aspect, multiple masses, candlelight rosary procession the night before the big feast day, a novena prior to that, lots of devotions that are going on all throughout, and lots of confessions, hours and hours and hours worth of confessions over the years I've heard there.
Wow.
Fortunately, in recent years, I haven't been able to be there personally because my work has kept me away. But I always, know what's going on. And then I have one brother, it's his birthday. So that there's always, and he always would joke that the fireworks and the bands were all about him. And he owns a newspaper there, and the band will always stop and play Happy Birthday for him on the morning of the feast. They go out on a little jaunt, and that's one of the stops. They'll play Happy Birthday for my brother Dave.
So now, if somebody were to go to Hammonton, what are some places that they have to try?
Oh, I'll get in real trouble, Tony. Come on, it's I
Name them
think
all. Name them all.
I think it's important. There are the markets that are there that are still family owned, that still have wonderful things. Of course, there are various farmers markets that are also, especially on Route 30 on the White Horse Pike there. And downtown Hammonton has now, it's had a revival, a complete revival. And there's also a lot of arts and theater and all kinds of things going on there. But I think that, there's a place that's a long time place called Joe Italiano's, Maplewood, which has been there for ages unto ages, and is a really, again, family owned, and a number of just a long history, and really, very consistent, really good food, very Italian American in the style in which it serves food. Lots of good pizzerias. There's an old one that was always my family favorite called Bruni's. It's in its second, I think it's second owner now, but they continue the same traditions that are there, and that's in downtown, in the area of downtown Hammonton. There are, several different places that have opened up over the years, that are, that have some really good Italian food. You really can't get a bad meal in terms of Italian food in Hammonton. And not every one of the owners are Italian, nor are the chefs. You may have a number of people from the Hispanic community, who are often in the kitchens there as well. So but also a lot of family-owned places, family-owned Italian places that are there. Another one downtown is Marcello's, which has but then there's like a wine bar that recently opened, again, owned by an Italian-American family, that really has some wonderful and creative, very creative cuisine. Some of it's also, has an Italian flair to it. But so again, you can run the gamut. The other thing is that's near Philadelphia. So cheesesteaks, fantastic cheesesteaks. And then of course also hoagies. Which is good. You're taking the Philadelphia names for things. In Hammonton, but those are those are very, very, there's places in Hammonton that are just fantastic when it comes to those sandwiches.
What's the best cheesesteak, if you can say it?
Uh, I'll beg off of that because partially because I don't live there anymore. So the ones that I would really knew and knew well, that's part of the problem when you don't live in a place, and I haven't lived there since the mid 1980s. So I go back, I'm home, I've tried different things, and when the paper that my brother owns, called the Hammonton Gazette, they do a whole set of awards down to like best cheesesteaks, and they call them the Hammies. Um, and then other people who are involved in. One of the neat things is that there's a lot of small business owners. Of course, a lot of them are suffering right now, and there are a lot of Italian American owned business, and people who are very proud of their heritage, but also proud of their American heritage as
Yes.
well. And
Now,
the contribution they're making.
you still obviously have family that is in Hammonton.
My entire family is there. Yeah. In fact, yeah, my entire family's there. I have one brother. He has owned motels in Wildwood, but he's still in the area there. And of course, my mother is still there. My father passed away in 2011. And then also my two of my other brothers, and my nieces and nephews are all there, going through the schools there in Hammonton,
Wow.
whether the Catholic schools or the public schools. And it's neat to see that because they've all taken an interest in uh, the life there, in making a contribution to the community there, which is
That's
great to see because that's something that my parents instilled in us. My brothers are all very much that way, no matter where their work is, whether it's in Hammonton or Wildwood, and now the next generation. So it's tremendous to see.
it's important the pride of place, the pride of where you're
Yeah.
from, of your history. Because a lot of times, when you kind of make it you make it, you kind of you forget about the little guys, you forget about your past, your history, and that's what makes us who we are. Is our
Yes.
ancestors, the sacrifices they made so we could have the lives that we live today. I mean, I just think of my own family, just the sacrifices that my great grandparents made to get here into America,
Hmm.
to give us a better lives. I mean, they didn't realize then all the hard work. I mean, you think about this great country of ours, and a lot of it was built by Italian Americans.
Yes, and there and that's what we last year and I don't want to sound boastful here because I'm very proud of my family, and it really had more to do with them than it had to do with me. But my parents and our family was honored by the National Sons of Italy Foundation, here in the here for at a national event here in Washington D.C., and given a humanitarian award.
Hmm.
And that was really, and my mother had just turned 80 the day before, and it was really wonderful to see my parents honored in that way, most particularly. As I said, it was for the whole family, but we were able to talk about the importance and really publicly talk about the importance of our Italian heritage and growing up as Italian Americans, and what that means and what that has meant and what the way to give back. And that evening, all of these people who were honored, just to hear the tremendous way in which they have just given back. They don't shirk from doing that. And again, as I said, my great grandfather Donio came with 20 years old with one bag and never returned. And so those stories are continue to be stories. There are people I work with today, who are new immigrants to this country or children of immigrants to this country, whether Italian or not, and they have that same hope that's there. And I don't think that that's just some strange thinking. It's a tremendous hope, and Italian Americans, I think, really can show that in the
Yes.
way that we, in what's happened in just a few generations to so
Yeah.
many.
You're absolutely right. Before we close, I just want to ask you a couple more questions about like what was it? What was the I guess the calendar, the church calendar, the Italian American calendar in Hammonton. So did you celebrate? Obviously, Christmas was. Did
Yeah.
you do this feast of
Christmas
seven fish?
Eve. Christmas Eve.
Feast of seven
Yeah.
fishes or no?
Yeah, I mean, as time went on, of course that gets varied. What you go from smelts to shrimp.
Yeah.
It's like so or you get both. I mean, but like we would have, for example, one of the things we would do is it was a capellini with a anchovy sauce.
Mm.
And calamari in red, in a red sauce. And then we would have, but before we would have all these different hors d'oeuvres and things that would try and suffice, get the seven in there in one way or another. And most of the Italian families in Hammonton did that. Some of them much more traditionally, the bacala and all these different things. As I said, as generations can't grant. Some people became more sophisticated and everything else. It's we're going to have crab meat.
Yeah,
that kind of,
lobster.
and so it became that kind of thing in some instances. But I think for a number of people, it was just simply the tradition of everybody together. And I have tremendous memories of that, of my father's brother's family, my father's sister's family, all of us together around the table. And and it just was this. It was loud. It was, and then of course, that was the initiation for any, if somebody came, with a future spouse, or actually with this spouse, who then was not Italian American. It was always quite the interesting adventure for them to experience that of all things. I think in terms of calendar as well, when you get to things that were those special occasions, communion, confirmation, baptisms, huge crowds. It was not a small party. It was it was a crowd. Every birthday was a crowd. It wasn't just your immediate family. It was because everybody was nearby, you just kind of came in and here, hey, we're here. And that was just, it was just part of it all. And so that you didn't even think twice about.
You expected it.
Expected it. You expected that the extended family would be a part. They were not intruding in these moments. They were expected parts of that. And today I don't know if they're so expected, the extended family.
You're right. And I always remember as a kid, they would, I don't know why, there would always be entertains, because you never know if somebody was going to come over.
No, yeah, you never know.
You always had to have a little, you always had to have something, just in case.
Yeah, because it's bella figura. You have to. You can't. You gotta make sure that you're putting out something.
Yeah.
But it was, and I think it's in that kind of calendar. As I said, in the summer, of course, it was the feast days, and then something like Thanksgiving, which I think a lot of Italian Americans, we would still have all the turkey and everything else, but of course there was, we'd have what we would call escarole soup, which was the Italian wedding soup.
Yes.
And then you'd have a ravioli, and then you'd get to the turkey. Eventually, of course, everybody became more weight conscious over time, and so that a lot of those things disappeared, and we kind of went down to the turkey. But we did them around, Easter.
Yes.
Visiting at Easter breads. Ricotta cookies, the pie, the ham pies, and they had the Italian names, but in Hammonton, a lot of those Italian names stopped being used, and you talk about the ham pie, but they were the things that where did they get these from? These are all from Italy.
Yes.
And visiting family. I remember Easter, we would go this one, this aunt, this cousin, this relative, whatever, and you guys sit down, you have the coffee, you have the cookie, you have this, you have the pizza, and you have to have their pie, and this one's, and you don't say anything. This one was not as good as the other one, and be careful. You know, it's like especially as a kid, you know, sometimes you'll blurt out something. It's like,
So did they call it Pizza Gainer down by you or no?
no, well, you know, some people did. In my family, no. It
Now,
was
but you mentioned that
ham pie or sausage pie. They would also do it with sausage, but it was the
well,
same consistency, you know, with the like a pie crust kind of consistency, and then the interior with the cheeses and so forth. I've
so
never
the
made them, but yeah,
so but you call the macaroni pie the pastiera?
pastita. Yeah,
Huh.
we would call it, and it wasn't sweet.
Yeah, it's more savory.
It's savory, and we would have it on Holy Saturday night. Because I remember I said my one grandfather was a butcher. We would have steaks that he would butcher, and we would have fresh broccoli rapini, um, from the produce brokerage. So, you know, and my mother would make the pastita, and we'd have that instead of bread.
Huh.
So it was that was a family custom in my own immediate family. Well, that particular immediate family, but that came from Sarno, and that came from there, and from the false. My mother was a Balazzo, but her mother was a Falciani, and the Falciani side.
Hmm.
That's what they made.
Did they do St. Joseph's table down by you or no?
The parish, you know, was interesting. Yes, some families did, but because the parish was named St. Joseph's, they did this massive thing in the parish hall. And the Josephs would pick up the statue of St. Joseph and carry it out over to the parish hall and place the statue from the church on the table. And you'd have all of these things from all of these people from around the town in the parish that would have all this stuff there. Of course, you know, there was always somebody, you know, always a number of people who would have their little bags at the end, you know, and would be taking a number of things home. But it was a really nice custom that the parish did for many years. I don't know.
Because
I don't think they still do that, but
traditionally St. Joseph table came out of Sicily, so it
yes,
makes sense that the Sicilians were
yes.
some of the first settlers there, that they would have a St. Joseph tradition there.
And that was the parish patron, as I mentioned, back in
Yes,
Gesso. Hmm.
yes. That makes sense. So the both parishes were both Italian at one point.
Well, none of them were really. They were all territorial parish. St. Joseph's was the first one, and then in the '60s there were two additional parishes that were created. One was called Saint Martin de Porres, and the other was Saint Anthony of Padua. But both pastors in both instances were Italians. They were Italian. One was from Italy originally, and one was Italian American, and the Pallottines were at that time. So it was a very fascinating thing because you had these three parishes. Eventually, then one of them, St. Martin de Porres, closed in this consolidation. Interestingly enough, it's an events venue now, um, and then St. Anthony still is there, but it's now the parish name is St. Mary of Mount Carmel, and that name came to the fore when my cousin, Father Tom Donio, who was pastor in the parish there.
Oh, so there is priestly you have priest relatives.
Well, yeah. Interestingly enough, and in fact, he was ordained a year after me. He's older than I. He's one of my father's first cousins.
Huh.
My grandfather Donio, Frank Donio, was the oldest of the 14 brothers and sisters, and one of his younger brothers, Salvatore Buddy, one of his sons is a priest of the Camden Diocese, Father Tom Donio, and he was ordained in 1995. I was ordained in 1984. And he was pastor there at the time of this consolidation, and came up with the parish name of St. Mary of Mount
Huh.
Carmel, and
But
that's
not a Palatine.
no, he's not a Palatine. He's a diocesan priest.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Camden Diocese. He still serves in the Camden Diocese.
Hmm.
Hmm.
There really is a strong Italian presence in the Canon Diocese, because even they have the
Yes.
big festival of the Our Lady of the Assumption, the Wedding of the Sea in Atlantic City.
Yes, and also in Wildwood. Wildwood has a Wedding of the Sea as
Oh,
well.
I didn't know they
Hmm.
do.
Yes.
Really?
Yep. Well, North Wildwood particularly has a large Italian American community.
Huh.
And then you also had a lot of people from Philadelphia South Philly and so forth, who would go down to that area. So yeah, it was there's a significant Italian American presence in the Wildwoods. The three, so you have North Wildwood, Wildwood, and Wildwood Crest.
Yeah, 'cause, I mean, you hear of these certain towns, and you think, like you said in the beginning of the interview, you talked about New York, Philadelphia, San Francisco. You think of these
Mhm.
Chicago, these large Italian enclaves, but yet there are so many little Italian enclaves that
Yes.
many people have no idea they even exist. And I think that
No,
that's important to kind of get that information out there.
it is, and especially the rural ones, the farming communities. Those are kind of a revelation to people, that these communities exist. But a lot of families that were involved in farming and produce, and really are very much involved in that in those areas. That a lot of small farmers and sizable farmers as well, who are Italian Americans.
Hmm.
And as I mentioned, Hammonton, Vineland is another place. But throughout South Jersey, you'll find a lot of Italian American farmers, who are really supplying a lot of the a lot of the fruits and vegetables that you'll find in the grocery stores, especially in the Mid Atlantic and in through the Northeast.
I mean, think Jersey is the Garden State. I mean,
Yes,
Jersey tomatoes are some of the best tomatoes
they are.
in the world.
They are. They're
I mean,
fantastic.
just growing up. I mean, but I mean, you're obviously you grew up in like the epicenter of the Garden State of where the
Yes.
garden really is. But even so, you think about, I grew up in North Jersey, and a lot of the old timers, they would have. Even my dad had a backyard garden, and it was just,
Right.
it was a way for people to, that had these hard jobs or these laborious jobs, just to kind of decompress in their garden. People nowadays, they think, oh, that's hard work going gardening, but for them it was just like a way of decompressing.
It was, and it was also putting them back in touch with their ancestors, especially the Southern Italians, Sicilians. This was what they did. They, even if they, whatever, if they baked bread, or if they had goats, or they had this or that, or a shepherd, they still also had a plot of land usually somewhere that they were farming for the family. And so this is something that is just part and parcel, particularly among the Southern Italians and Sicilians, that really they brought here. And is, I mean, how many, I can't tell you how many fig trees, the wrapped fig trees, in winter, you know, you'd have these things kind of in the backyard, and I took them for granted that they were just in the backyard, all this wrap thing, to keep the fig tree from dying. But one of the biggest smiles I ever saw on my father's face was when we pulled to the side of the road, and we were up in the mountains, and it was September, and these figs were there. And I have this picture, which my mother has in the front room of our house, where he's picking this fig from the tree. And he has the biggest smile on his face, because he was just remembering his great grandfather and the fig trees that he had, and how he helped him care for them and so forth. So, they're wonderful, wonderful memories that I think, sometimes we're just not passing on to people.
Yes, and it's the three F's: faith, family, and food. That's kind of
Yes.
that's always been my motto: is faith, family, and food. I think, in actually, again, to mention Bishop Caggiano, he mentioned that as well. That those are so important, because that's what brings us together. And again, it could be over. Food could be over at a wedding, at a funeral. We get
Yes.
together and we eat. So every moment in our life revolves around those three things: faith, family, and food. And that's
Mhm.
what I think. That's what makes us, a beautiful group of people, the Italian Americans. Not to say that other cultures or others,
No, that's true.
other, but again,
Well,
we have that blood connection to it.
yes,
So,
it's very true.
Father, I want to thank you so very much for taking time. This has been a blast, and I mean, I could talk to you for another 3 hours about all this stuff, and I
Thank
have to
you.
make it a point to really come down to Hammonton. I'm praying this year that
Yes.
this pandemic will go away, and things can slowly. I know it's going to take some time to get back to normal. There might be this new normal, but I mean, again, to have that connection to our faith, and I would love to visit Hammonton, even if I can't make it for the feast, at least to go and see the town and
Yes.
kind of experience it. And I would love to in future. Hopefully, I can actually meet you down in maybe in DC, or
Yes.
if you're in Hammonton, that would be a blessing.
I would hope so too, and I certainly will connect you with family there, and they can take you around. You know, they're very involved in the town, and particularly my youngest brother. And so know that you're always welcome to Hammonton, and I hope to also see if you come down here to Washington, or even over to Baltimore. There's some opportunities there to maybe check out some of the Italian communities. There's still remnants of at least the Holy Rosary Parish down in Washington, D.C. with the Scalabrinians, our own in Baltimore. So hopefully you'll be able to come down and visit us this
I have
way.
I have to make a road trip once this is all over. I got to make a road trip. Father, before I let you go, can you give us your blessing, your priestly blessing?
Sure. Let us bow our heads and pray for God's blessing. Lord Jesus Christ, risen one, we are in great gratitude for the hope that you give us, even in the midst of our doubt, our darkness, our challenge. You are our hope. You are the one who is assisting us through this time. Help us to deepen our faith in you. Help us always to be grateful for our faith, for our family, for our heritage, for all that you give us. We ask that you may bless us now and always, our God, who is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Father, God bless you. Thank you so much.
God
This
bless.
has been great.
Thank
Again,
you.
I am Anthony Scillia, better known as Tony Mangia. You've been watching and seeing the At the Table with Tony live stream edition with Father Frank Donio. Again, I want to thank him. This has been a blast. Again, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Ciao for now.
Ciao.